and welcome to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear, the podcast about people making society and our economy sustainable and environmentally responsible. Today, we're going to be talking literature and life in the wilderness because, you know, it is not every day you get to meet one of your fictional heroes. My guest is Doug Peacock. He's a wilderness warrior, author, and he's the inspiration for Edward Abbey's well-known character in the Monkeywrench Gang, George Washington Hayduke. You probably still see bumper stickers that says, Hayduke lives. Well, in fact, he's talking to us today.
Yeah.
When I first read the Monkeywrench Gang back in 1982, it was Hayduke's militancy that galvanized my awareness about the desecration of nature that continues to this day. And I started to do some of the things in the book and am still proud of those things. Doug has a new book out called Was It Worth It? And it contemplates a life spent in nature, as well as the partnerships in wilderness living and defense that he had with Abbey and others in the environmental community. And his 1996 book, Grizzly Years, which recounts his 20-year relationship with grizzly bears around Yellowstone, is still one of the great books about the misguided relationship people have with apex predator species. Was It Worth It is published by Patagonia, and it's one of those few books that carries an environmental benefits summary. It's printed on recycled, chlorine-free paper, so it's a book you can feel good about buying. You can learn more about Doug at his website, dougpeacock.net. Doug Peacock is all one word, no space, no dash. And we'll include links in the article that accompanies this podcast so you can find his new book, Was It Worth It? Welcome to the show, Doug. How are you?
Thanks, Mitch. It's a pleasure.
Well, it really is a genuine pleasure to have you here with us. The way you lived and the way it was recounted by Ed Abbey really changed my life, and thank you for that. I want to start off with a question. It's the title of your book, but you found the phrase, was it worth it, carved into several different boulders around remote parts of the Cabeza Prieta Mountains by someone named John Moore between 1906 and 1912. I think it's a question we all ask, and we always ask about it in retrospect about our lives. What do you think he was asking? Was he asking the next person that came along? Was he asking the world?
I think he was reaching to the cosmos, because we don't know anything about John Moore. He was probably a miner looking for a quarter's worth of copper in those dry, hot hills. I mean, it gets up to 130 degrees in the summertime out there, and the water holes go dry. And, we know he lasted 6 years because I've found, John Moore over a span of 6 years, about 6 times. And, on 2 occasions that his name is followed by that enigmatic phrase, was it worth it, with a question mark. And I could never shake that one.
Well, is that question one we need to ask about our own life? And should we be doing that ahead of time, proactively, like, will it be worth it?
I don't see any reason why not, because I think it empowers us to do the job we're trying to do in saving, especially what's wild left on the planet, wild ecosystems, mm-hmm. and, and wilderness, even though wilderness is kind of a cultural phrase, that's still a gold standard. I mean, I'm still totally active in saving grizzlies up here, and I've been doing this for over 50 years in a row. And, you just, you never quite know if you're climbing your way up this mountain repeatedly, maybe rolling a boulder on the way, but, it's to evaluate your own life, because we all get skeptical, I could have done things better, different, more. But in fact, I looked at it all and I did a lot. And, I'm able to squeeze by with that. And I think it empowers me to try to, not that I have many days or steps left, but, in every one I take, I'm going to fight for the wild.
Well, so it kind of gets you thinking about making every step worthwhile too.
Yes, exactly.
Tell us about how you began your life in the environment after Vietnam. You headed off into Yellowstone and lived in and around grizzly country for years.
Well, I was brought up in a family. My dad was a Boy Scout organizer, and, it was in Michigan, but the wilderness was my true home from the time I was a little boy. And, I had penetrated the Rocky Mountains before going to Vietnam. And, I just let the draft catch up with me. And back in those days, you could either get married and have a child or stay in school. And I didn't want to be in school anymore. I went to University of Michigan, but, I didn't enjoy college. And I usually would quit and go out west, to pound nails for dimes and explore the wilderness. So when I came back in Vietnam, I was like many, many other vets. I was no good around people. And, and so I just gravitated back to the Rocky Mountains and kind of waited for spring and summer and moved my way north, from Arizona and Utah on up. Spent a lot of the summer in the Wind River Range of Wyoming on the east side, which is, a wild, wet, cold place. And, while I was up there late in the summer, I came down with a malaria attack, which was no surprise or no big deal because I'd had a bunch in Vietnam and I had a couple after I came back here. But I knew what was coming, so I had to get the hell out of there. It was too rugged. I was all by myself. I was up there for 3 weeks before I checked in with anybody. And so I got out and I went to Yellowstone, which I knew superficially. And Yellowstone, comparably speaking, is, a flat, seasonable place compared to the Wind River, where you've got glaciers to cross and, rain, snow squalls every bloody day. And I was living off the land, and that meant golden trout. And I'd been eating them for 20 days, and I was sick to death of golden trout. So I went to Yellowstone, and I went to a place that I knew that was not too many miles from a road where I could park my Jeep, and it had hot springs. And my idea was that I was going to go back in like the traditional use of a spa and soak in hot water and kind of regain my health. And, and when I went in there, I went out of my head, literally, because I was recording my temperature. I'm an old Green Beret medic. And so my temperature once my last recording was 105.6.
Ouch.
That was it. I don't know if I was into my sleeping bag for 3 hours or 3 days, but when I woke up, the sleeping bag was wet from sweat and the fever had broken. And so I went into this hot spring, and by then it's October, maybe middle October, and the wind is howling, and it's a beautiful place with a hot creek. It starts out boiling hot, ends up tepid. So by going up or down the creek, you can get any temperature you want. And I was in a pretty hot area of that little creek, which was 4 or 5 feet across. It's not big, but there are potholes where you can get down and let the hot water roll over your neck and whatnot. And, I was sitting in it. There's a few trees strung along the creek, but it's in a meadow area. And I'm soaking in the creek, and I look off to my side and I see a mother grizzly with 2 yearling cubs grazing across this meadow about 200 feet away or so. They don't look at me or anything, but they're there. And I don't know squat about grizzly bears, except you're supposed to avoid mothers with cubs, and so I didn't quite know what to do, but there was a little tree right on a creek bank, and I sort of decided that I was going to climb that tree, because I had read a lot of bad advice. Your wildlife texts back then were things like outdoor life and such, and you got a big macho view of grizzly bears, you need a big bore firearm, and anyway, I decided I was going to climb this tree. So I waited till the grizzly bears were looking the other way, and they'd never looked directly at me. They knew I was there the whole damn time, but they chose to ignore me. And and so when their backs were toward me, I tried to stand up and lurch for this tree, and the whirlpool-like effect of the hot water caused me to black out. And I half passed out, smashed the tree with my forehead and cut a huge gash. So I can actually see the blood dripping down my nose and eyes. But it didn't matter. I was terrified. So I scrambled up this tree. And when I got to the top of this tree, after a couple of minutes of reflection, it wasn't much bigger than a Christmas tree. I mean, it was really silly. I'm squatted at the top, and the bears could have had their way with me. But they didn't. But nonetheless, they came and grazed within 25 feet of me, this mother and her 2-yearling cubs. And, they were probably slightly habituated because all the grizzlies in central Yellowstone up until, 1968, 1970, fed on garbage. The park fed on garbage. And so they were, they call it habituated, but it's just a fancy name for getting used to something. And they probably had less, fear of me than they needed to. So, I'm just sitting up there on top of the tree, but the wind is howling and it's about 40 degrees. And, I'm blue and bleeding with the blood dripping down. And I'm perched atop of this silly Christmas tree, like some species of silly towhee, perhaps.
This is not what I would think of as the description of the beginning of my life in the wilderness. But I mean, then spent 50 years, as you just said.
They got my attention. I'd spent a summer in Alaska too, but the grizzly bears, those grizzlies got my attention. And I just spent the rest of the summer tracking them there until it snowed on me and I got out. And, and I felt I had arrived. I really indulged and engulfed myself with grizzly bear dumb. And when you're in grizzly bear country, it is the quickest, that kind of wilderness is the quickest exit I know from culture, because you get out of yourself, because there's something out there that, if it chooses to, it could kill and eat you at any time. And, so you don't think so much about your portfolio or your girlfriend or any of that stuff. You just see better, hear better.
And you thinking back to Grizzly Years, you recognize that each of these bears has a personality, that the family units have real that they act like us in a lot of ways and not like us in really important ways. That relationship with a predator that a Teddy Roosevelt mentality would say, well, let's shoot that right now, is very different than what the traditional American approach is. And it changed our culture because you were out there having those kinds of interactions. How do you feel about having been able to bring the grizzly bear to such prominence?
When I was out there with grizzlies, I decided that I don't have a copy of Grizzly Years, just the opening passage talks about, I decided that I wasn't going to carry a firearm anymore, ever in grizzly country, and I haven't, for 50 years. But you need them other bad places like Immigrant, Montana, But nonetheless, my shooting days were over. That was not an option. I did not go out there not to share the habitat. And I had to learn a few skills along the way, and I learned slowly, and I made all kinds of mistakes. I got charged by mothers with young a couple dozen times, where, mostly they just broke off right away, but sometimes they charged all the way and skidded to a stop. One mother grizzly, she had 2 yearling too, skidded to a stop, maybe 6 feet away. I don't know. She leaned forward as if to smell my pant leg and then turned and ran away. But,
wow.
It was, no bear has ever touched me. So, and if you behave inoffensively, and specifically, I mean, do not be a threat to the young of a mother grizzly bear. Yeah. That's 90% of everything. And, you will get out of it every bloody time. I mean, even if a bear charges you and can't stop and hits you, if you play dead and don't move a muscle, don't be a threat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
you'll get out of it, and a lot of people have. And I had a mother grizzly with a single yearling. I was with my daughter just before I walked her down the aisle a couple summers ago up in Yellowstone. We were on the top of a butte that had a, it was steep and it had enough acreage up there to support, bears and antelope and sheep and stuff like that. But where the wind is howling. So I'm we're huddling behind a glacial erratic, a big rock. And
Mhm.
I look at my daughter's face, and beyond the wind, her face changes. And I look, and over the rise is coming a mother grizzly in this cub of hers. And, she's only a couple 100 feet away. That's way too close, to be with a mother.
Yeah.
And she sees us, we see her all at the same time. And she goes through the whole thing. Bears, rear.
Right.
And rear is not a threat. It means they want to get out of there, and they do it to hear and smell better. But she rears and slobbers and does things with her mouth. It means she's trying to decide what to do.
Mhm.
And all I say is, "Don't move." And the mother grizzly, in about 3 or 4 minutes, proceeds to calm down and walk right over this rise, and we're in a little gully. She walks right past us, maybe 15 feet away,
Wow.
And that was just, 3 years ago. And she proceeds to move on to the edge of the cliff, which is, again, only 20 feet away. And
Mhm.
she stops and nurses her cubs for about 5-10 minutes, right on the edge of the cliff. And she's right there with us. And this is a matter of trust. And you got to keep your part of the deal.
Sure.
And, it's ongoing. But grizzly bears are so capable of expansive social behavior among themselves. And they can transfer some of that tolerance to humans if you kind of behave inoffensively. And, that's been a great window into, grizzly bear society is, you see all kinds of social gatherings. They range from salmon streams in Canada and Alaska to berry patches in Glacier and other places where there's abundant food. So, you learn a lot by grizzly bears by just allowing them, that space, that trust to be themselves in front of you.
So, the new book, a lot of the essays revolve around death or ends of eras in your life. And the essays feel like the ceremonies for the dead that you describe bison and elephants doing. There's different performances that we go through. How does death and thinking about death tie us more to nature? How does it connect us?
Excuse me, you said, how does this connect us to?
How does death better orient us to a relationship with nature?
Well, it is the logical conclusion of a life, lived well or not. And, it's in every step I take, and I'm not afraid of dying, and I don't think about it much, but I'm not going to be around forever. And that's never been, it's never been a big worry of mine. It probably gave me a good head start with grizzly bears, but death lurks everywhere, and I've lost a lot of friends, like a lot of us have by now. And I'm in my geezer years, and it's just an awareness that an organic end is coming to us. We might as well make the most of it, and celebrate it in some ways, and approach it and anticipate it with ceremonies of life, and that's why I have all those weird buffalo skull circles and grizzly skull circles in the backcountry. When my culture doesn't provide ceremony, I tend to make it up myself, and I borrow a lot from indigenous culture.
And that's really what our society has evolved. We've learned from all these pasts, but all those pasts have passed away too. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind when we're living in nature. I want to take just a short break. We'll be right back to continue our conversation with Doug Peacock. And we're back to continue talking with Doug Peacock, author of Was It Worth It?, his new book published by Patagonia. So tell me about your friendship with Ed Abbey and how his portrayal of Hayduke changed your life. It feels to me like you must run into a lot of people who have a lot of assumptions about who you are and how you behave.
Yeah, that may be true. And when the book came out, the attorneys for Lippincott, the publisher, had Ed Abbey write a really embarrassing letter to me, and about how only the good parts of Hayduke should, and I should forget about
Attributed
the
to you.
rest. Yeah. And Ed and I were both living in Moab that winter of 1975, and we took a walk up Mill Creek, and right at the junction where that petroglyph, it's kind of a map of the area.
Mm-hmm.
We took the letter out and burned it there on the rock, and neither one of us spoke of Hayduke again. So, another friend, mutual friend, said, friends don't do that to one another. In a way, he was right, but it's all even. It's water over the bridge, and it's just all the glitz of having Hayduke lived scribbled on bathroom stalls throughout the American West is counterbalanced by the doltness of Hayduke himself. So, hey, and incidentally, I just had a drink with the real Bonnie in New York City.
Right.
I was there last week. I got a American Academy for the Arts Award in Literature,
mm-hmm.
which comes with enough beer money for almost a year. Significant for a guy like me, and so me and Ingrid got together, and I'm reading a new draft of the screenplay, The Monkeywrench Gang, right now. I'm part of that team, not deeply involved, but as an advisor and counselor and whatever, some kind of a producer.
I've heard about that one for years. A friend of mine wanted to make that film for decades. So, you don't dwell on that outlaw image at all. In fact, there's a chapter in the book called Headwaters, and it's about when the FBI was hunting for you because of your involvement in their first. But you don't talk about the FBI barely at all.
Instead, no, they weren't. I wasn't a serious suspect, and they weren't a serious threat. But it happened. They did knock on my door in Tucson the same morning they busted Dave Foreman, and it's just my instinct is you get in a river and you don't leave any trace of your leavings, and you just stay in it for 3 weeks.
And that was the really cool thing about that chapter for me is that, somewhere off in the distance the FBI is out there hunting for you. You went fishing and boating and had a remarkable trip down the Big Hole River.
Yeah.
So you just live in those moments. You don't get caught up in those other things. Is that something you had to learn to master?
Yeah, and again, it's the experience in wilderness with animals, top carnivores like grizzlies that really, give you freedom from that trap. You really have to live in the moment, and the dominant attitude is one of humility. You're not the top dog. Your species can't get to practice its goddamn dominion and colonialism everywhere we go. We're the most arrogant species on Earth, and the fact that the grizzly bear still roams. Yellowstone's they roam to here, but Yellowstone's just to my south a little bit. But reminds the most arrogant species on Earth of their true place in the world. And that's a really healthy place to be, because I find that, humility is really the emotional posture behind reason. And it just opens you up. It's good.
The other thing that comes in as a theme throughout the book is cooking. You cook in the wilderness, you cook at home, you cook for Abby's funeral. Yeah. How does gathering the ingredients for a meal from nature change your relationship with food and the environment? Can you reflect on that?
Yeah. Is that a picture of a mushroom behind you? Never mind. I'm just saying.
This one, I think that's Gandhi.
Oh my God. Chrome Dome. Sorry, I thought he was an Ammonite. But anyway, I'm thinking right now the little morels popping up under the cottonwoods down on the river bottom. Yes. And it's this is kind of a lean time of year, but I'm still catching a few fish, and I'm picking mushrooms already. And it's just everywhere you go. When I first got into mushrooms, it was just like adding an element to the wilderness that wasn't there before. And it's just a whole nother world. It's just all of that stuff, plants, edible plants. I hunt, not much, usually game birds and a very occasional deer, usually when it's in the garden or caught in a fence. But,
Well, now, so for you, you're aware of the bounty that it provides, but you're also very mindful of not taking too much. That's another theme that comes throughout the book. And this really kind of goes to this question about what does it mean to be indigenous to a place for me? You talk about handing over the need to hand over public lands and wildlife management to indigenous practices. How can we become indigenous? Is there a path to that kind of insight?
Well, when I say that I think the best thing for all Western wildlife management in America and everywhere else is to drop our wildlife as chattel, only useful as trophies or meat, and think of them as relatives, as brothers. And that really is an indigenous point of view. And the animal has its own value. You don't take an animal's life without really working on it, and as if you were, a hunter in the Plains country 200 years ago, where, you don't take a life without some sense of reciprocity. And, you learn about the animal, respect the animal. And, I've pretty much stopped. There's just so little left that I don't feel like tapping into it anymore. Yeah.
Well, you've spent a long time in defense of the wilderness. What advice do you have for the environmental movement today? When you look at where we are, climate change has now made people so aware of how much damage we've done, but what do we need to do in order to restore wilderness? And we'd love to hear what you think.
Well, first of all, we got to stop. We got to start with that perspective right there. There'll be no wilderness. There'll be no large species left on Earth if we keep going on the path that we're on with climate change. And I don't think the tipping point is very far away. I think we'll see it this decade, and it's a tragic, sad thing because I have children, and along the way, I chose to fight for wilderness. And, but in all decisions, I think about, maybe I'll read one of the last paragraphs in the book.
Great.
Because, when it is indeed our time to walk off stage with the mammoths, what might be the measure of our character at the end of our tour? After peering into the abyss, how do we behave? There is great joy in doing the work of the world, fighting for wild causes, saving pieces of the magnificent natural world. There's plenty of work. Do your job with decency and an open heart. Here's a little patronage here, but it's only one paragraph out of 300 pages, and hold nothing back. Join the tribes in their dignified defense of native rights. Indigenous viewpoint should replace all notions of Western wildlife management. Respect this militant resistance and embrace the necessity of civil disobedience. What right isn't always legal, and vice versa. Consider getting arrested. Who and what is at risk? If past extinctions provide guidelines, then it's all life larger than a small meadow mouse. Now I can unpleasantly anticipate being among those minority humans left on Earth to die from old age. I'd be happier if everyone could. It's the scourge of my geezerhood. I am unconcerned with my own death and fatally engaged in the lives of all my survivors. There is a bottomless, contradictory sadness in a fleeting glimpse of justice. Nature bats last, avenging the scorched earth, pay back to Homo sapiens. Bundled up in the loss of beauty and the suffering in the lives of the people you love most. But then I watched a glacier grizzly walking slowly through a herd of elk that paid him no mind nor got out of his way. And I go on to with a list of magical events and conclude it was worth it.
And that last chapter is extraordinary.
It almost wrote itself. I mean, it was the fastest thing I've ever written. So I was headed there for a long time. And this is I didn't know I had another book in me. When you're a writer, you're never quite sure. But this one, once it started going, it was the fastest book I ever wrote.
What's really, Doug, coming out through all the books of yours is it's being there and being present that you do. You don't go looking for these adventures. These adventures happen if you get into the right relationship with your world.
Yes, truly.
I want to thank you for taking some time with us today. It's been just a pleasure to talk with you, Doug. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mitch. It's my dog now. Sorry. I'll see you, buddy.
Take care.
You bet.
We've been talking with Doug Peacock. He is the author of Was It Worth It? A new book published by Patagonia. And of course, the answer is it was worth it. I can't tell you how important that last chapter is. Not only does he recount a whole series of amazing moments that he's experienced in the wild, but he talks about the decline of biodiversity in the Yellowstone National Park region and how overwhelming those changes have been during the course of the 50 years that he's been spending a lot of intimate time there. This is a really great read. You're going to love it for a variety of reasons. Check out Was It Worth It? I hope you'll enjoy it as much as I did. This is Earth911, Sustainability in Your Ear, and we're going to be back with another innovator interview soon. This is an example of when we get to talk to somebody we've always wanted to talk to, but we always want to talk to all of our guests, and I hope you enjoy all of the questions that we're asking, and we'll share them with all your friends and family. Get this podcast out there. Let's get more ideas shared and in use so that we have less waste. We're going to be back soon. In the meantime, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.